Welcome to 206, Apply IT Programming. This session we are going to look at error handling and debugging. At the end of this course, you are expected to be able to recognize how different web technologies create different types of errors, identify the type of errors in PHP, perform basic debugging, debug HTMLs, set up PHP to show errors, adjust PHP level of error reporting, create their own custom error handler, debug PHP scripts, debug SQL and MySQL problems. In your web application, you have different error types, and these errors could be coming from your HTML file or HTML tags, or to be coming from your PHP codes, or your errors could be coming from SQL, or it could be coming from MySQL database engine itself. Okay, basic debugging. When you have errors, first of all, you have to ask yourself, are you running the right page? Because in many instances, when you are writing an application and you have errors, you go and you are correcting the errors. Unfortunately, you are correcting the errors on a different file. So you correct errors on a different file, and then you go and run a different file, and you don't expect the error, you don't see the changes. So this could mean that you're actually editing a different file from the file you are running. So you must always make sure you check the path and the file name you are running against the file you are editing. You must also make sure that any editing done, you save the changes before you run the file. If you don't save the changes and you run the file, then you will not have your errors debugged. You can also ask yourself whether you are running all PHP scripts through a URL. You must always run PHP script through a URL. Don't try and double-click a PHP file to run it. Know your version of PHP. So you should also know the version of PHP because you may be using some functions that are not supported in the newest version of PHP that you are probably running. So you must always use functions that are related to the versions of your PHP. And you can determine the versions of your PHP by going to the PHP info, which can be found on your exam dashboard. You can also find out the versions of MySQL within the MySQL dashboard or PHP My Admin dashboard. You can find out the versions. So always remember to use the appropriate functions. Know what web server you are using and the version of the server. It is also very important. Whether you are using Apache or you are using IIS, you need to know the type of web server you are using. In this particular exercise, we are using the XAMPP, so obviously our web server is an Apache web server. Try different browsers, particularly the layout problems. You want your website or your web page to be of a particular layout, and then you are seeing funny things that you are not expecting to see. You can try another browser and see how it will look like. Okay, debugging HTML. We can easily check the source code of HTML. We can also use some of the validation tools that can help us correct our HTML. So for instance, the validator.w3.org website allows us to be able to look at matching tags, broken tables, and other problems that are associated with our web page elements. Try and use Firefox. That is a recommended browser for web application development. I'm not being biased here, but that is what the literature say, and I have equally found it very useful than any other browser. Use Firefox add-on widgets So Firefox is also shipped with some widgets that you can download and add it for development purposes. It helps in debugging of your web content or your web page. So it's very good to use this tool. If you have problems with your HTML layouts after putting all your CSS and HTML tags, or maybe your JavaScript is not running very well, you can equally check this by running other browsers, either Chrome or Internet Explorer, to see how your layout will look like. But this will have nothing to do with the PHP core codes. Yeah, in PHP, we may have a number of errors. So you can have error due to syntax, that's syntactical error. You can have runtime errors, and then you can also have logical errors. The first two errors are very easy to debug, because once these errors exist in your code, your application will not run. So you will figure it out and be able to debug it and allow your application to run. The logical problem is a very serious problem because it's a problem that will allow your application to run, but you get unexpected results. So in this particular case, you have to run through the codes, read through the codes, and see how your logic was laid out in the coding before you'll be able to debug this. But for syntax and runtime errors, the server will be able to give you even the line that is having the problem. The server will be able to give you the line. So you can go to that code line and then do your debugging. So as you can see here, this is telling me that the error is on line 21. This is telling me that the error is the warning is coming from line 13. So I can easily go straight and go and check. But logical error, it will not tell you. You have to go and find out where the error is. Well, displaying PHP errors, we have to make sure that we set certain parameters of the configuration file of the PHP to be able to display errors in our codes at runtime. So we can either do this by going to the configuration file, physically going to the configuration file in PHP and set the parameters to display the errors, or we can do it on our page. If we want to do this, as I specified earlier in the earlier presentation, if you want to go to the configuration file to make sure that your errors are displayed, you can go to php.ini file, which can easily be accessed by browsing through the file explorer, or you can go to the exam control panel, and that will allow us to be able to pull it up and then set it up. This code allows us to be able to show errors on our application. So this is actually doing this within your own program by not changing the entire PHP configuration, but just for your application to be able to bring out the error for you. Okay, so that's it here. So here, this example is a PHP file, and then we say init. So this function, then we specify the display error, okay, directive. This is actually directive, and then we set this one to 1, and this is just to deliberately create error. As you can see, I'm trying to divide 1 by 0, and this is not allowed. This is going to give me error. So once this line is hit, then the error will be displayed. So you must always do this when you are doing the development, because if you don't enable display error, you'll be having errors that you will not see, and your page will be crashing, and you wouldn't know how to debug it. So during development time, you must always make sure that you enable display error to see your errors, to enable you debug them. But remember, when you are going to production, try not to do that, because you don't want users to see the errors that are coming from your pages. Okay. So once we say we want to display error, we also would want to have access to different levels of errors that may be coming up from our program. We have notices, we have warnings, and we have errors. And this can be done by the error reporting directive. And the error reporting directive takes all this as constant. So depending on what we specify is what we will see. If you want to see only warning, if you want to see errors, if you want to see all errors, all these things you can specify for your error reporting directive to give you the errors that you are seeing in your application. So let's see how that is used. So for instance, if I specify in my code that error reporting should be 0, this means that show no errors at all. I won't see it. Now, this means show all errors. So if I want to show all errors, then I have to set the error reporting to show me all the errors, including warnings and everything, and notices. So typically, this is how you do that. Let's see here. You can also suppress errors. You can deliberately suppress error. So for instance, if you look at this, I'm including a file into my PHP file. This is my PHP file. This is another file I'm calling from another PHP file I'm calling into my current PHP file. I want to say that if this file is not available, don't shoot error. Otherwise, if you don't do that and then we are including this file and this file is not available to the current file or is not in the folder, then PHP will give an error and then your page will be crashed. So you can deliberately suppress errors by using the @ sign. So this means that even if you can't find this file, don't bring the error. Just continue executing the page. All right? So here too the same thing. I'm saying that if you divide this by 0, this will definitely give you error, but I want to suppress that. To suppress that, just bring this one, and that will allow the page to continue execution. Okay, so common PHP error causes: omission of a semicolon. Okay, so every line in PHP must end with semicolon. Every program instruction must end with a semicolon. So if you omit that, then you are going to have problems. Imbalance of quotation marks, parentheses, curly braces, square brackets. All these are symbols we use or characters we use in the PHP programming. And if you don't use them appropriately, then you are going to have error. You open brackets and you fail to close it. You open curly braces somewhere and you fail to close it. All this will give you error. Also, improper use of quotation marks. We have explained that earlier, how we can use the double quotes and single quotes. Also, misspelling or miscapitalization of a variable name. You try to change your variable name somewhere along the source code, you're going to have errors. So there are some techniques we employ to help us debug our PHP codes. First, we must make sure that we turn on errors, display errors. We turn display error on. We must also set our error reporting directive to all, so that it will give us all errors that we come across in the code. We must use comments. We must use comments, and you should also use print out at each level of your code. If you want to debug it, you can be printing out statements, you can be printing out the content of variables to be able to track what is happening in the source code. So we use all these tools to help us track our error and debug it. We can sometimes do custom error handlers. So when the error happens, we want to be able to handle it ourselves instead of just shooting it and printing it anywhere. So to do this thing, we will define a function to do that. So this function can be written to take up to 5 arguments. First, we can write the function to have the first argument of the function could be the error number, because each error has a number, so we want to be familiar with that number. So you can output the number, but you need to grab it as part of the error. The error message, which is a textual error, we have to pass it to the function as well. Then the file, which is giving us the error, and particularly the line number within the file that the error is coming from. So we have to take all these things and pass them into the report error function, and then we handle it inside the function how we want the error to be presented, either onto a different page, or we want to give a beautiful flower to the user and say nothing happened, just wait next time, so that the user wouldn't see the error and wouldn't be angry. So you can do custom handling of your errors. Okay, so yes, so this is SQL debugging. You can print out queries from your PHP scripts. So if you want to check to see whether your SQL statement is having some issues, so you can print out those queries from your PHP script. You can run the query using another interface. So for instance, if you have written the query in your PHP and you're having issues, you could just take the query to phpMyAdmin, open the query window, and try to run the query in there and see what it will give you, because the phpMyAdmin will do proper formatting of the query statement for you to actually see what is happening. You can also rewrite the query more simple and rebuild it in parts until you identify the problem. Because sometimes you can have a very complex query, nested query, maybe this is what we didn't discuss. You can have a query inside another query, with that one to also have another query statement inside. This is nested query, very complex. If you find yourself in a situation like this, or you have a situation where you have about 3-4 joins in your join SQL statement, in such a situation, you may want to take the query in smaller portion, write them one after the other. If it is a nested query, try and focus on the inner query and see that it runs better. Then you bring the next query, next outer query in that sequence until you are able to debug your query statement, and then you can add it to your PHP. MySQL access debugging. Reload MySQL after altering privileges. So after altering privileges, you go and add a new user. You've given the user new user of MySQL database. You've given the user administrator, or your administrator, you go and give yourself a password. So all these things, you are changing the privileges within MySQL database. So once this is done, you have to make sure that you reload MySQL before you continue. Double check the username and password if you have issues, and then make sure MySQL is running. Thank you. We have come to the end of the session, and I'll see you next time.